Hello again. Today we'll be creating a colonist capable of single-handedly travelling the world, eradicating anything that identifies as imperial. How? Well, scattered across this weird ultratech fantasy version of the Rim are vaults, in one of which we find our 4 colonists, all of whom are elves, by the way. Barry, Kath, Arjen, and the most important of them all, Artemis. Artemis is our resident genetic freak and has the most powerful superpower you can find in VFE Ancients, the mod which adds these vaults. Promising Candidate, which grants the bearer 0% chance of failure when adding further superpowers in this gene tailoring pod. Naturally then, he's going straight into it just as soon as the power is on. But while he's getting his genes tailored to better fit his large muscular legs, let me show you around. Here on the west we have our barracks, hospital and power generation. To the south, a comms room, chem fuel storage and a rec room/kitchen, and up north we have a dining room, a random royal bedroom, these hydroponics basins, and of course Artemis in his pod. On the east, there's the welcome room. And as much as I'd love to, we can't really just hang around inside the vault forever. We need resources in order to stay alive and make progress. For starters, as usual, I'm playing with Combat Extended running, so we need to be able to make ammo, which requires a few techs. To help demonstrate the complex and varied world we're inhabiting in this playthrough, a shuttle has crashed, spewing out all manner of weird folks, from fawns to androids to, well, whatever that thing is. I don't really know what it is, but I sure as hell don't like it. Anyway, moving on, since I'm absolutely not planning on recruiting anyone else to our little vault family, inside we'll build a quick and dirty temple to keep the people happy whilst they work feverishly on their various tasks. We get the odd early game raid, but we've got turrets and guns here, so, you know, coming round here waving your little wooden shiv around, I don't know what you expect. Anyway, Artemis's pod is about to pop. Let's see what superpower he got. Oh, well, look at that. He got Assassin. That was basically the dream outcome, and he got it on the first try. But with great power comes a very poor immune system, apparently. For every superpower you gain, you also get a weakness. Alongside his promising candidate power, for example, Artemis is mute, which is one of the better options for a super assassin to have as a weakness. The only company Artemis will ever know are the corpses of his victims, which you can't talk to. I mean, you can, but it's a one-sided conversation. Anyway, back in the pod, Artemis, you're far from finished. Whilst he's in there for his second stint, the rest of the gang are getting down to business, researching, building, playing foosball. What we're building first is some nutrient-based infrastructure. A grinder to mash up raw rice and pipe it over here into a storage tank, which then pipes the delicious slurry directly into the colonists' mouths while they sleep. How incredibly efficient. Since they've all started with sky-high expectations, they want some symbolic art and a moral guide. I made Kath the moral guide and set her to work carving out a couple of those statues they so desperately need, which starts to cheer everyone up. A couple of days later, Artemis is out of the pod once more, this time having gained the self-resurrection power. Means that in theory, if he dies, he'll come back to life after 3 days, but still be wounded. Or he'll immediately come back with no wounds at all. I don't know, the description says both, and hopefully we'll never have to find out. He also became a zealot, which is, again, very far from the worst of options available to him. His other option would have been great, completely removing his need for food, but it came with the weakness that prevents him from fighting, which, well, you know. He popped out just in time for the Empire to show up for a quick raid. And hey, they're actually pretty scary with their shiny armor and guns. I let them run at the point defense turret that sits outside the base, thinking it would wipe the floor with them, but they actually made pretty swift work of it, only losing a single combatant. They didn't fare quite so well in the entrance versus all of the other turrets and Artemis, thankfully. It's time to take a break from playing with genes and get down to some serious meditating. Artemis will need a variety of different powers available to him on his journeys, from utility powers that let him mend his armor all the way up to powers that will let him shoot fire out of his face. Rather luckily, he started with the chronopath tree, meaning he can grab time-skip meditation and age himself for Psycaster experience every few days, which would normally be a problem, but being an elf, he's immortal as far as aging is concerned. All of that means that now it's time for Artemis to sit down for a very long time. Decades have passed inside of his mind as he sat contemplating the nature of being. Outside of his mind, it's been like a few months or so. Kath has been researching feverishly and has progressed as far as advanced fabrication, opening up myriad possibilities for arming and armoring our super assassin. However, it appears that some of his arming is going to be done for us by raiders. Some of what appear to be imperial deserters from a faction named Dan have come to have a go. Their armor, as our turrets will now demonstrate, is very good. It's more protective than the recon armor and marine helmet that Artemis currently wears, and on top of that, it grants a psi sensitivity bonus. And on top of that, it looks sick, which is always a plus. It took a fairly protracted fireball throwing match to take out the last of them, and then it's back to meditating for another decade. Or 3. His absent psyche spent about 30 years figuring out how to shoot fire from his eyes, a most noble of causes. Outside of his brain, further months have passed. The vault is getting comfier and filling up with all the things you'd expect a transhumanist colony to have: neural superchargers, sleep accelerators, that one growth vat that you never use but need to have to get rid of the negative moodlet for not having any. Of course, I'd be lying if I said that the colony was actually surviving with no help from Artemis, though. His meditation is interrupted every few days whenever something more threatening than a maddened rabbit shows up. But before he can go out on his, well, let's call it what it is, which is a genocide. For his genocide, he'll need some rather special equipment and weaponry. He's had a charge rifle from the get-go thanks to our vault start, and I had initially given him something called a spike lance from Rimworld, which he used in a few defenses. But I've ended up making him a Gorse rifle instead, which fires and reloads faster as well as being way easier to make ammo for, since they're basically just lead sabers. Here he is demonstrating the Gorse rifle on some mechanoids. But it's not just about external equipment. A great many things are going inside of Artemis too. Bionic legs, arms, eyes, heart, cock, spine, the whole kit and caboodle. After all of those obvious bionics, he'll also get detoxifier lungs and kidneys, and that's about all we can make for him for now, since everything else I want to stuff into his swollen mutated corpus will need to be purchased from traders, either directly or through tech prints. So whilst we wait for some traders, Artemis is going to go and think for a few more decades about how to teleport and shoot lightning out of his hands. Again though, he's actually being interrupted every couple of weeks once we've bought or researched something else to implant into him. He'll take on a nuclear stomach, a pain stopper, a joy wire, an armor skin gland, a coagulator, and a healing enhancer. Pretty much anything that could conceivably help him in his extraordinarily murdery quest is being surgically slipped into his body. Aside from the surgeries, he was left pretty much to his meditations this time, on account of the constant mechanoid clusters outside killing anything hostile, or friendly, that tried to approach the vault. Thankfully, deliveries from space land on the other side of the vault, so I was able to make a little hatch out to go and collect our purchases in safety. Outside of his brain, it's been almost 2 full years now. 2 years of research, trade, and just generally living a rather boring life of sustenance. Exactly what you'd imagine vault-bound life to be like. Meanwhile, Artemis has lived multiple human lifetimes in his own mind, contemplated the births and deaths of entire universes, reached 19 different versions of religious nirvana, and come out of the other side with only one thing: bloodthirst. He gathers up a few thousand rounds, a stack of medicine, 20 or so survival meals, and gets on the road towards the nearest imperial outpost. With a bedroll, a nuclear stomach, and a joy wire singing fuzzy happiness into his brain, the journey flies by, and before you know it, he's there. The enemies are numerous and well armored, but more importantly, their constructions are built of wood. Whilst it would be fun to just sneak around setting the place on fire, we didn't build this Gorse rifle for nothing. After getting the Imperial's attention, Artemis skips to some nearby cover and starts shooting from range. It seems that they have a Psycaster of their own, however, doing some kind of weird blood magic here, which lets Artemis here get in close. Too close. So Artemis Chaos skips them away. Where to? Doesn't matter, just not here. After setting the surrounding forest ablaze, he skips himself away yet further back, and at this point I was beginning to wonder whether or not he could actually manage this level of heat all by himself. He must have heard my misgivings because he then proceeded to go full-on sicko mode and put down 10 Imperials in about that many bursts from his rifle. One of whom dropped a plasma saw, which is a chainsaw but more orange, and it attacks very fast, which should be pretty overpowered when you always crit and only ever hit vital organs. We'll see. In any case, it's great for quickly destroying things. After patching himself up, he'll find somewhere to take a rest before hunting down and burning all of the settlement's power generation in order to shut the turrets down. After a quick meditate, it's back on the road, towards Pymetpolis, a city added by Rim cities, which upon arriving, we see did not generate particularly well. Never mind, there's still Imperials to kill here. Artemis charges in and gives the plasma saw a test on people. Unsurprisingly, this is what it looks like versus an armoured opponent, compared to someone that forgot to wear their helmet. So he skips himself away, swaps to the Gauss rifle, and gets the job done. Whilst rooting around the scattered buildings for loot, we find a sack of knowledge, which essentially functions as a tribal version of the neuroformer, either creating or upgrading a colonist's psi-link, which takes Artemis to level 25, granting him the ability to breathe fire. Alright, there's plenty more loot here, mostly medicine. It's time to have a rest, scoop up the rest of the goods, and then we'll be on our way to the next point on the map. The next few years of Artemis' life are spent trudging from settlement to settlement, leaving only ash and blood in his wake. In the next place, after, doing rather a lot of killing, Artemis is rummaging through the loot and finds a neuroformer that allows him to summon meteors, which might come in handy. As well as that, there's a set of excellent quality Phoenix armor. It doesn't grant psi sensitivity like the Deserter armor, but it's quite a bit more protective, which in my opinion is worth it. On to the next. Here's a much better example of a city. Nicposopium. Lots of buildings, lots of loot, lots of Imperials. After putting down one or two guards, we find this. Yuzuki, a persona monosword with psychic hypersensitizer and calm thoughts. Very good. Technically, this does less damage per second than the plasma saw, but unlike that, it actually has armor penetration too. Here it is being put to rather good use for clearing out the city's defenders. Remember that Artemis always crits and always aims for vital organs. He's quite killing. He killily makes his way through the rest of the city, looting and finishing off the rest of the guards, finding along his way a few psi trainers which give him a jump start on the necropath tree, as well as finding another sack of knowledge which he uses to further that necro knowledge with steel vitality. This place has, for one reason or another, gotten extremely laggy now, and obviously this will happen when you're doing dumb stuff in Rimworld, but I mean, it's really bad right now. So as soon as the game tells me that the settlement is destroyed and really wants me to know that the Imperials are fleeing, don't worry Rimworld, I'm fleeing too. Fleeing whatever is annihilating my TPS here. So back on the world map with the game back to normal, we're headed towards Akazgal, whose map icon would seem to indicate it's in a bit of a shit state. Literally the moment Artemis loads onto the map, someone in a war casket starts swinging his big old sword around at him. I remember from earlier playthroughs that EMP is extremely strong versus war caskets, but that doesn't seem to extend to the lightning psycasts, and for some reason Artemis keeps vomiting. After making some distance, the war casket user reveals that they're rather speedy, so Artemis uses pocket sand. Okay. Whatever, it did the trick, they're bleeding to death. Just break clear, give them a few zaps, and watch them die. Very good. So this place is indeed rather run down, and far less populous than the other cities, and its loot is accordingly shit. It's also very wooden, so Artemis, at the ripe old chronological age of 666, sets the place on fire and then leaves. The next settlement is about 22 days away on foot, which I had to endure in real time. Thankfully for you, video editing. Halfway there, however, I realised that we're not carrying enough food and decided to stop by a local treehugger settlement to trade. But we don't have any silver. Well, alternative diplomacy it is then. With all of the tribe's food appropriated, Artemis is back on the road to his next imperial target, Placea. Along the way, he's ambushed by a peg-legged man with a tribal axe named Wang. Nice one, Wang. Anyway, Placeia has a lot of wooden buildings and flamethrowers, which seems like a really rough combination to deal with up close. So instead, Art hangs back and takes out all of the Imperials as they run towards him over open ground. After slowly working through disabling all the turrets by taking out their power sources, Art has a quick meditate before getting back to it. As you might imagine, the next few hours look very similar to this. Settlement to settlement, city to city, Artemis trots the globe. Artemis. Come on, Artemis, you can sleep when the Empire is dead. Artemis trots the globe, emptying out the now dwindling supply of Imperial settlements with a healthy combination of fire, lightning, and bullets. Quite some time ago now, he lost one of his bionic eyes. I think it actually happened quite early on, but evidently one has been plenty, because we're down to just 2 more Imperial holdouts. A city and a settlement. First, the settlement, which contains yet another neuroform, pushing Artemis Psylink to level 30. So, the last remaining bastion of Imperial power on this world. One more slog across the world map and here we are, headed into Nosrusium, where Artemis loses his other eye to a charge LMG wielding cataphract while trying to get fancy with meteors for the big finale. Serves you right, showboater. But if that was showboating, then what does that make this? Blindly killing the rest of the Imperials in melee since he can no longer aim a ranged weapon. You might think it'd suck having to chase everyone down to melee range, but with a combination of the Warlord tree's speed boost and that Necropath vitality leeching power, he's rolling around at the speed of sound. He's got places to go, he's got to follow his rainbow. He can't stick around, he has to keep moving on. Guess what lies ahead? Only one way to find out. Sorry, I got lost in the city escape there, it's easily done. But what does lie ahead for Artemis? He's completed his mission. The Empire is dead, or at least they're not present on this planet anymore. Without him to guard them, could the rest of the Vault's occupants possibly have survived? Well, he'll never know, because honestly I abandoned it earlier to save TPS and I've totally forgotten where it was. Anyway, please remain indoors. There's like and subscribe out there, it's dangerous. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.